Hello and welcome to the Driver Hire podcast. My name's Tony from Driver Hire Croydon and Sutton.
Hello, I'm Gary from Driver Hire in Colchester.
We represent two of Driver Hire Nationwide's network of over 100 offices. And we decided to get together to create a series of regular podcasts for people who want to know more about driver hire, but principally to provide hints, tips and tricks to help our drivers be the very best that they can be. Hi Gary, how you doing?
Very well, Tony. Lovely to see you again. I notice your beard is getting very long now, especially at the front. A few grey hairs there.
Well, thank you for noticing the grey hairs. Yeah, I'm auditioning for a ZZ Top tribute band, and if I don't get that gig, hopefully it'll be long enough for Christmas to stand in as Santa.
Well, it's looking good. It should be okay for Christmas.
So what are we talking about this week then? Well, we recently met with Lawrence Bolton of National Driving Centre to shoot a video all about how you go about getting yourself a vocational licence. And then we did a little podcast off the back of that just to explain that again to those obviously subscribing to the podcast and not the video. But it kind of raised a sort of few questions, didn't it?
Oh, it certainly did. And there's different sorts of driver CPC, and it gets a little bit confusing. And we've got to try and help clear that up today. Well, hopefully anyway. Yeah,
exactly. So CPC is the theme of today. And CPC is, of course, interwoven with the practical driving skills that you need to demonstrate in order to get your license. So it's not just simply taking a driving test in a truck or a bus. It's about learning and demonstration of theoretical knowledge and also displaying that theoretical knowledge in a practical way. So what we're going to attempt to do is talk through that process.
Yeah. The first thing, Tony, we've said CPC. Not everyone knows what it means. Shall we tell everyone?
It's not a secret. Yeah, absolutely. So CPC is the Certificate of Professional Competence. And, you know, the word professional in that is, of course, no coincidence. This is a professional qualification. And this is something that is now coming up to its 12th birthday. So kind of let's just sort of talk through how it works. So if you're going to drive commercially, you're going to need a CPC card. And there are examples of people that could drive trucks without CPC, but that would be for very, very limited things. But anybody earning a living doing commercial work is going to need a CPC. And the way that you first acquire that is interwoven in this 4-part test that we learnt about last time.
That's right. You've got parts 2 and 4, which contribute to getting your driver CPC.
Yeah, exactly. So maybe if I just going to give an overview of the 4 parts. So part 1 is a theory test, and you're going to have had to have passed a Cat B to be able to get a provisional Cat C or D. And that theory test is very similar to what you would have done when you got your Cat B or car license. So that's part 1A and 1B. So 1A is theory and B is hazard perception. Then new for commercial vehicles, which you won't have done before, is this part 2. And part 2 are case study questions around the CPC syllabus, and we'll explain that in a moment. Part 3 is the practical driving test. Now, for anybody who is of our aging years and passed their truck or bus test back in the day, this is the bit that you will recognise most. Part 3 is most similar to that which we did all those years ago. And then part 4, which is my favourite bit of the CPC, and I'll explain why in a moment. Part 4 is the opportunity to demonstrate that theoretical knowledge to the examiner. So it's a physical test of your knowledge done at the test centre. So we'll explain that through in a moment. So what is the CPC syllabus then? What stuff does somebody need to know in order to be able to pass the test?
Well, there's various things on there, Tony. They're all helpful in normal driving as well as commercial driving. But the regulations on this are mainly towards the commercial for buses and HGV vehicles.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So, there's clearly going to be regulations that are different. So, just as one simple example, speed limits for trucks and buses are different to the speed limits for cars. But, that's just one of many different regulations that are different.
Yeah, we've also got safe loading of vehicles and passengers.
Yeah, exactly. So that's, of course, the biggest difference between a car and a commercial vehicle is you're doing something with the vehicle other than just getting yourself and your friends about. The load. How do we load? How do we secure that load, be it people or things?
Yeah, and that will turn into health and safety questions and so on. There's a whole syllabus on health and safety, which is very good for the employer as well as good for the employee as well.
Yeah, that's right. And then anybody embarking on commercial driving is probably aware that the hours that you drive are limited. So there's a whole bunch of different rules that you need to learn. So these are driver's hours rules and also working time regulation rules.
Yeah, which are very confusing at times when people don't understand them and try and tie the two together, which they aren't designed to be, as we've discussed in previous episodes.
Well, it's funny actually you say that because our most listened to podcasts by a factor of, I was going to say 2, I think it's nearly 3 now actually by a factor of, let's call it 3 because it will be by the time this is published. Yeah. So by a factor of 3 is an episode on the most misunderstood driver's hours rules, and even for experienced drivers it demonstrates how you can easily get yourself confused.
Yeah, well, that's nice to hear that we're doing well on something and trying to make life easier for all of us out there.
Absolutely, yeah.
The other one is digital tachograph. I mean, myself and you, Tony, both didn't know what a digital tachograph was when we first started driving. We've actually got something that aids us as a driver. We put the card in and it's easier to see if you've had a 15-minute break, a 30-minute break, a 45-minute break, etc. So
you say when you started an analog tachograph? I thought you were logbooks when you started, Gary.
Well, in the army, we just ignored every rule going. So.
Okay, so other stuff that's in there is you need to have an understanding of how the vehicle works. This isn't stripping down head gaskets and oil changes and stuff, but you need to have an understanding of the mechanics of the vehicle. So the braking systems, the transmission systems, all the safety features of the vehicle. So you'll need that certainly.
Yeah, and you get reminded on a highway code and things like that as well, and road traffic laws being slightly different on HGV, which we've mentioned on speed limits and things like that as well.
Yeah, and then I suppose sort of lastly, there's a lot to do with fuel efficiency and the environment, and there's lots going on with commercial vehicles to make them as fuel efficient and as clean as possible, and also the environment around you in terms of people. So how do you protect vulnerable road users? How do you drive safely with the limited vision that you have in a commercial vehicle, particularly in cities? So all of that is in there, and this is the kind of stuff that you'll need to learn and be able to demonstrate in the part 2 case study, and then in this part 4 load safety and vehicle safety demonstration that you do for the examiner.
I mean, there's a whole raft of information that you need to know before you're allowed to go out and work in the commercial world.
Yeah, absolutely. So part 2, that's the syllabus that you'll do at or the syllabus you need to understand to be able to demonstrate in a multi-choice exam at the theory test centre. Now, most people would probably go and do part 1A and 1B and part 2 all at the same time. You don't have to, but seeing as you're going along there for the day and the stuff that you'll learn for both is interrelated, it makes sense to do that. You don't have to, but it makes sense to. So part 3 we said is a driving test, and then part 4, my favourite bit of CPC. So part 4, I think, is the thing that makes a modern day new pass driver a far better driver than I was when I passed my test back in 1989. I think it's fair to say, Gary, and I think we probably mentioned some of these things before, but a lot of what we learned was by luck rather than judgment on the job.
But yeah, very much so. And we've talked about our faux pas in previous episodes of being in lay-bys, learning how to use the curtains and little things like that. And you've talked about ratchet straps in the past and how you learned how to use one, then you turned out you didn't need to use it. Little things like that.
Yeah, all sorts of weird and wonderful experiences. But part 4, the way it works, it's done at the same place that you'll take the part 3, the driving test. So at the test centre, and you could do it on the same day. You could do part 3 and part 4 on the same day. You could come back and do part 4 later. But what do you have to do? Well, there's kind of really 2 things to it. One is about the vehicle, one is about the load, and the examiner will ask you questions about both. So, for example, the examiner could say to you, talk me through the things that you would look for on a daily walk-around check before you take the vehicle out.
Yeah. So you'd be explaining, I'm looking at the tyre depth on this vehicle, and I'm looking, it's an even pattern across the whole tyre depth, or the whole tyre width, and not just on the corner and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And, mirrors, lights, windscreen, wipers, load, all of that stuff. And the good thing about a walk-around check is that actually, as you physically walk round, you see all the things in turn and remind you to check them. So yes, the examiner will want to know that you know how to check your vehicle before you take it out.
Yeah, and a good way of doing it, as you walk around, you're explaining, I'm looking to see the fuel cap is secure on the vehicle, and you just talk out loud as you're walking around doing it.
Yeah, exactly. So, and then of course the other part is the load safety part. And the examiner has this trolley, so a bit like a big roll cage, a big steel-framed roll cage, and within it are things like ratchet straps, load restraint bars, chains, cones, all the kind of things that a truck driver would use. And what the examiner would say is, right, Gary, let's just imagine that you're going to be carrying a load of timber. Which of these load restraint devices would you use if you were going to be carrying timber? And you would say,
ratchet straps.
And he would say, right, if you'd like to take the ratchet strap, please can you secure it in a sort of demonstration over this steel framed trolley and show me how you would do that, which is what you would then do.
To these people's concerns, you have a couple of hours practice on this before you go, by the way. They don't expect you to know this.
Yeah. Oh no, absolutely. This will be part of your training course with whichever driving school you go to. Yeah. And the point is that you might be doing a job where you're carrying timber, and that might be the job you go straight into. But of course, you're qualified to drive anything at that point, or any commercial vehicle. So you might be taking a supermarket trailer, for example, full of roll cages, and you need a load restraint bar to go across to stop the cages moving. Yeah. You might be carrying steel, and you'd need chains. You might be operating a high ab, and you might need to demonstrate how you would cone off the area to work in. It just depends on the job that you go into. But of course, this part 4 is trying to cover as many bases as it possibly can, which you'll need to study and understand to be able to demonstrate any of those.
Yeah. So when we've completed all that, we get another certificate, and we're now a qualified driver. We've passed our test for driving the vehicle. We're now passed our test for the driver CPC. And I can go into the commercial world. Is that correct, Tony?
Absolutely, you can. Yeah. So, you can drive straight away. Your actual cards will come through a week or so after you've sent them in. Most employers will want to see your cards, but theoretically, you can drive on past certificates at that point.
Yeah, we keep mentioning driver CPC, but when you get the card come through, it becomes a DQC, doesn't
it? Yeah, just we love a TLA, a 3-letter acronym. So yeah, exactly. So the Certificate of Professional Competence, that is demonstrated on a plastic card, wallet-sized card, same size as your driving license, same size as your digital tachograph card, and it's called a driver qualification card, or as you say, a DQC.
Yeah, we just like confusing everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, okay. So yeah, and I suppose the point I would make is, with that level of training, with those 4 tests, one A and B, part 2, the CPC syllabus, part 3, the driving test, part 4, the practical demonstration of that. A new pass driver today is definitely going to be a better driver than Tony Goacher was in 1989 when he passed his test, where I hadn't even coupled a trailer, I hadn't even seen a ratchet strap before I went out to work. So definitely better today.
I was going to say, the lack of practice you've got, most probably a lot better.
Yes. Okay. So that's that gets you qualified, and that process is called initial qualification. But even better news, doesn't stop there. You then move into periodic training. Now, periodic training is every commercial vehicle driver, bus or truck, has to do 35 hours of training every 5 years. And that 5-year window starts from the day that you got your initial qualification. So if you passed your test today in 2021, you're going to have until 2026 to do 35 hours of training.
Yeah. I believe it was actually set up that we should do it once a year, but we've traditionally found, Tony, that everyone wants to do it in the last 2 weeks of year 5.
Oh.
Is that the case?
Well, you're balancing logic and practicality here. So the logic is exactly that, Gary. Yeah. So the logic says if you've got to do 35 hours of training, and these are all 7-hour modules, you need to do 5 7-hour modules in 5 years. So logically speaking, why on earth would you not do one module once a year for 5 years, and then by, in this case, 2026, you'll be ready for your next 5-year window? Why would you not do that? And it's actually quite frustrating for me, because we do have people that are sent to us for CPC courses by their employers, and they've ended up, I don't want to tar all employers with the same brush here, because there's some really good employers out there. But there are some that are almost scared of investing in a driver and that driver leaving. And so they leave it to the last minute and end up pushing the guy through to do 5 modules, sometimes literally Monday to Friday in 1 week. And of course, drivers didn't pass a test to go and sit in a classroom. So it's not their favorite week.
No, it's hard work sitting in a classroom for 5 days learning subjects. Some stuff they'll know already, but some new items and everything else. And we're just not used to it. And it is a shock to the system. So I've got a theory behind this, Tony. If all employers, and it includes us, invest in a driver once a year, this problem would go away, because we're all investing and they'd all have every year a CPC qualification behind them.
Yeah, exactly right. And I hope that we'll get to that point once it's more of a routine in the industry. I mean, I know it's been around for a few years, but once it's considered more of a routine, then why not pick the quiet week for whatever your quiet week is in your industry, and every business is cyclical to some degree. So whatever the quiet week is, why not do a day's training there? Why not do a day between Christmas and New Year, for example? Do it early January, when traditionally the industry is not as busy as it is through perhaps the summer months, for example.
Yeah. So in theory, we should be doing a course once a year on driver's hours, for example, or health and safety, and little things like that to keep us up to date and know what's going on and the changes and regulations.
Well, that's right. Yeah, and you make a good point, because the CPC syllabus is the same for this periodic training as it was in the initial qualification, and you get the opportunity to pick the elements that you want. So either if you're choosing it as a driver, the things that most interest you or you need more training on, or as an employer, the things that are most relevant to your work. So you don't have to do the entire syllabus. You can cherry pick the elements of it that you want. And the way that works for training companies is every course that they write, it will be slightly different to other training companies, and they have to map the elements of that course back to the CPC syllabus to get the course approved. So, it does mean that you could have completely bespoke courses for certain employers that were absolutely relevant and interesting for that driver's work in that business.
Yeah, it makes sense. So you're doing something specific for that industry.
Yeah, exactly. And just one other thing to mention on periodic training, if you're listening to this and you're thinking, I didn't do initial qualification, I didn't go to the test centre, I didn't go and sit a multi-choice exam. What happened back in 2008 for bus drivers, 2009 for truck drivers, was existing drivers were given what is called a grandfather right in kind of industry slang, or an acquired right. And what that simply meant was, if you were the holder of a vocational license prior to that date, you were given that first 5-year window, assumed through your experience. So if you're not recognising this and you're driving already, that will be why.
Yeah, so we got, from myself, my point of view, in 2014, I had to do all 5 days modules so I could carry on driving commercially.
Yeah, exactly. So the pinch point was 2014 for those people, truck drivers that got that grandfather right from 2009. Yeah. Okay. We were just talking just then about training that's very relevant to the specific thing that you're doing, and there is the opportunity with some practical training courses to have that linked to CPC.
Yes, I mean, there's HIAB. I've got 2 HEV trainees going on at the moment, and the first thing I'm doing with them is HIAB. They can't do it on an officer's course, but on a refresher course, you can get driver CPC to go with it. So a 1-day course, they can do a HIAB refresher and get their 7 hours towards their 35 hours.
Yeah, I think that's good because, as I alluded to just now, drivers didn't pass a test to go and sit in the classroom, and it makes perfect sense to me to do something practical to get your CPC refreshed. Yeah, good.
But you can do the same with the forklift on a refresher as well, and there's various companies throughout the country where you can do that as well. And the one I think is really good is the ADR. Oh, another 3-word or 3-letter acronym there, Tony.
And so what does ADR stand for, Gary?
I can't pronounce it, so I'm going to bat that one across to you. I always know Ian at Bradford office, when he was still with Driver Hire, was superb at saying this. So,
So as you know, I worked in France in the early 90s for 3 or 4 years, but I'm afraid I didn't acquire a decent French accent. So this I will try for you. So ADR is the Agreement for the Carriage of Dangerous Goods by Road. But the agreement was written up in Switzerland, French-speaking Switzerland. And so A is accord, which is accord, agreement. And D is dangereux, which is dangerous. And the word routier in French is an all-encompassing word, meaning everything to do with road transport. So accord dangereux routier, Gary.
Very well done, Tony. Far better than I could even attempt.
But yeah, so you can see why we use the 3-letter acronym ADR. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah, you can have CPC linked to ADR. So again, that will be training that's specific to your industry, completely relevant to the job you do, and therefore, a really good way of going about doing your periodic training.
Yeah. Again, that's classroom based, but that's a little bit different to the other ones we discussed already, and you get 21 or 28 hours driver CPC towards your qualification for the 5-year period.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so just to wrap up then, I suppose it's worth having a little chat around the future of CPC, because there's a question that I've been asked ever since that pesky referendum back in 2016, where we talked about nothing else than Brexit for all these years. Drivers are constantly saying to me, because CPC is European law, will that go away when we leave the EU? And of course, we have now left the EU. But we did a podcast several episodes ago where we interviewed Tom from the RHA, and ask that very question of the industry experts. And quite frankly, it's not.
No, it's here to stay. They're looking to do some changes, which is good, but driver CPC is going to be here for a while.
Yeah, and long may it continue, as far as I'm concerned. There is no substitute for education to have people be as professional as they can be.
I couldn't agree with you more, Tony. I'm a trained driver CPC trainer, the same as yourself. Even I have to go on these courses and sit there, and I will learn every time I sit on there. I will learn from my drivers around me as well as the instructor.
Yeah. So what is the future? Well, hopefully it can be more relevant, more engaging. So one of the things that JALPT have said, JALPT being the government organisation that runs CPC, is they're very aware that there are drivers who are repeating the same module. So really just treating CPC as a kind of a tick box exercise, cramming in 5 modules at the last minute before the 5-year window runs out. And sometimes you'll have a driver that literally is sat on a course for driver's hours rules, 2, 3, 4, even 5 days in a row, which is no good for anybody.
No, I'm aware, Tony, of firms that have 4 modules. So that's 1 in the morning, 1 in the afternoon. So in theory, they've got 4 different modules for Monday and Tuesday. So what happens on Wednesday? They start repeating Monday's course again. Tuesday course repeat on Thursday. So that is so wrong. I mean, don't get me wrong. I've got some drivers who need to go on driver's hours on a regular basis. But some don't need to know it all the time. They're very switched on to it. They know it far better than I know it. And they're very attuned with it. So we must stop this repeating the same course very frequently like we have been.
Yeah, I mean, fortunately with us, you could, if you did do 5 days in a row, you could cover a huge amount of varied content over those 5 days. But that's not really the point. The point that JALPT are trying to get to is they're just trying to stop people treating it as a tick box exercise. They want there to be a value for that training, and with anything, a little bit and often is going to sink in far better than cramming it all in at the last minute.
Yeah, it goes back to what we said at the beginning. It's designed to be done once a year. So if you've done training once a year, in year 5, you might be doing driver's hours again compared to year 1. But that's not a bad thing because regulations might have changed in those 5 years. Yeah,
agreed. Good. Well, I think that's really interesting. Hopefully, we've given a good overview of how CPC works. As ever, if you've got any questions, feel free to get in touch. And if you have enjoyed it, please do rate, review, and subscribe. And we'll look forward to speaking to you again next time.
Thank you very much for tuning in and listening to us again. And look forward to you coming back and see us in the next episode.
You've been listening to the Driver Hire Podcast, and thank you very much.
And as goodbye from myself, Gary Richards at the Colchester office.
And from me, Tony Goacher from the Croydon and Sutton office. If you'd like to get in touch with us, along with all the other Driver Hire offices, you can find us at driverhire.co.uk.
Thank you very much for your time. Bye-bye.